Hello and welcome, guys. We say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are coming from. This is an Ask Me Anything session. This is Saturday, the 22nd of February, 25. We gather twice a week, every week, and sometimes, like this week, three times in a week, to answer any questions from the community and make sure that they have their needs met to be able to participate fully in the budget process. So appreciate you folks for joining me tonight and or this morning for you as it may be. And we'll get started here. We will give a few minutes to see if other participants come. But for those of you that are here now, if you have any burning or pressing questions that you'd like to get started on, I'm happy to start now.
I guess just one note here too. Like I may ask some questions. In fact, I probably will. But also, I'm on the membership and community committee. So if there are questions in particular about the MCC budget, I'm not actually on sort of the sub task force that we have that's been working on the budget, but I have enough knowledge of it and that I should be able to answer some questions and as well just take input too. So I mean, we only have Chris Cata and Eli Rudianos here, but if either of you guys had questions about that in particular or input, I can both do my best to answer, then also take the input back to the MCC members who are working on this in a more focused way.
Great call out, Matt. Thank you for doing that. Definitely appreciate it. And yeah, for sure, it's always great to have committee participation here, and that you're here for the MCC. That is phenomenal. So thank you very much.
Yeah. It's mostly Catalyst.
But it is. So yeah. on Catalyst, probably the biggest thing personally for me is for us to kind of reevaluate whether or not we want Catalyst to go through Intersect. In terms of going, should Catalyst go through and be a direct proposal? The other thing I was trying to figure out historically was the total funds that Catalyst has historically applied for and not going any higher than what they've historically done, and let them go directly. Because I think if the numbers are accurate, historically it's been closer to 50 million ADA, and this time it was 75 million ADA. In the
so actually, it's a good point to clarify, because actually this is half of what they've historically asked for. But the way that what you're correct about is it's been 50 million ADA per fund, but this is 75 million for the whole year. So normally they do 3 funds in a year.
That's true. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point. Actually, to be honest, it's something to if I imagine that other people probably have sort of had that reading as well and not realized that they're actually scaling back to half of what's normal. As far as it being under, like, within Intersect or sort of under the MCC, I think the reasoning there is because the MCC is made up of people elected by the community, to kind of create like an umbrella of legitimacy for Catalyst as providing public goods for Cardano. Like, okay, if you're going to be using this money and distributing it in this way, it's been super valuable in the past, but now that we're entering this governance era, money that's coming from the Treasury should have KPIs, defined by people who are elected by the community. And so that's my understanding of the intention. But
that's good, Matt, because you leaned into exactly where I wanted to head with this part of the conversation. I've actually heard this several times. Why should those things be in Intersect? I'm like, well,
myself included.
Precisely because the reason these things are included in Intersect is because that's how you get accountability to these large companies. These large companies can do whatever they want, but if they have to come through Intersect in order to get their funding, then as a community, we can hold them accountable for their funding. Whereas if they go and make their own actions, well, then we're back to where we were before we had governance.
Right.
Which they didn't have accountability to us before. They did what they wanted. And sorry, Matt's part of IO. I'm not being mean here, Matt, but IO kind of just made their decisions and we kind of had to live with them. I mean, they did. That's not to say they didn't come to the community. They didn't get feedback. They did all those things. But the reality is that Charles was in charge and he made decisions and we lived with the decisions he made. That's really how it worked. Now they're voluntarily coming to Intersect and saying, tell us what you want and what you don't want. Tell us what you need us to do and what you don't need us to do. And so, like, let's give them that. Let's actually take charge, take command as an organization of the community, because that's
Mhm.
what we are. We're elected. I'm not elected. I'm just an Intersect guy that works for Intersect, but we're, the we of all those committees. Each one of those committees is elected. And so if you don't like what the committee's doing, you as an ADA holder have recourse to remove them. So, like, to me, it's incredibly valuable for IO to not try to go and circumvent this part of the process, and instead come through the process and embrace it. Because that's actually showing to me, that's showing leadership in the space, that no matter how big you are or how much you can do on your own, you choose to subject yourself to the community and to the elected members of the body that's here to oversee this particular part of the work. So sorry, I'm
Really
a
good way to
little
put it.
ranty there, maybe,
No,
but
no,
I'm
that's
passionate
perfect.
about this part of it.
No, that's perfect, because how I view it, right, is I take out the accountability aspect, right? I'm not thinking about that per se. I'm just thinking of, you know, Catalyst is just doing what Catalyst does. Do we need that extra oversight or overhead on the Intersect side? But the reality is it does, because at the same time of me saying, we should pull out Intersect, I'm also looking at, or Catalyst, excuse me, I'm also looking at Project Catalyst saying, hey, if I go back and look at the last few funds, who's making sure that that stuff's getting done? Who keeps coming back asking for more funds? It still hasn't finished projects that they completed before, and I don't know who's taking care of that, right? And who's enforcing that, and who's denying funds in the future. So I just figured, take that out of Intersect. But from that perspective of, hey, who's going to hold them accountable? And I would agree from that perspective that, hey, you know what, Project Catalyst should be forced to go through Intersect. So there's that extra layer, that barrier there that says no, right? Or you're not meeting these KPIs or whatever. So that's a better way to look at it, and I can definitely change my mindset to wrap around that, and that makes total sense when you put it
Yeah.
plainly as such. That makes total sense.
Even like from the sort of MCC perspective too, like if this committee weren't a good enough sort of feedback mechanism between the community and Catalyst, then I think it would be a problem. You might be better going just like
And
direct and
I think
having,
that's a large part of the concern
yeah.
is how good is that accountability layer, right? How good is the benchmarking of the KPIs? Who's doing those measurements? How trustworthy is that? And what's the track record that proves that? And we don't really have that, right? And Intersect's new, so it's kind of unreasonable to ask for that. However, I think what people would feel more comfortable with when that's presented forth is having that roadmap, that plan of how you plan to execute on that front.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I think it is reasonable to ask for that. To be honest, I mean, it's reasonable to ask for it and expect that there will be a process of iteration toward it, but it
Yes.
needs to be on a. You need to see improvement quickly enough that
Yep.
you can be confident that it's getting to where it needs to go. And in the meantime, I mean, really, sort of the kind of bottleneck there is elections for MCC members and the
Mhm.
reputation of those people in the ecosystem. So if if like Catalyst is going off the rails and being abusive, which I don't think would ever happen, right? But if
Yeah.
that were the case and the MCC weren't effectively stepping in to do something about it and to communicate that to DReps and to make adjustments in how they're doing oversight and say maybe shifting budget away from Catalyst for future funds, making this clear in the quarterly review cycle. Like if that wasn't happening, then I think, I mean, you could just elect other people into the MCC. But if that didn't work as well, then you would, I think, have that conversation about, okay, maybe this oversight mechanism just isn't working and we should just go direct. Until then, though, I mean, I'm on the MCC, so it's maybe natural that I would have this perspective, but I think it is a good mechanism for that. By the way, on Catalyst, I myself am not, because of the conflict of interest with me being an employee of IO, I'm not doing any of the direct, like making sure that Catalyst is overseen properly
Mhm.
stuff. Like that I'm leaving up to other people. But yeah, just to be
Sounds-
clear on my part.
Thanks, Matt. So Chris, another point of this as well, to kind of bring up, is that I've got a lot of experience in Catalyst. I've received funds from Catalyst in the past. I've worked as a milestone reviewer. So I've done kind of a lot of the jobs in Catalyst over time, just as a volunteer from the community, right? And I can say I do know of projects that are being told, no, you can't have funds because you still have stuff in Fund 9 that
Yeah.
is, oh, so I do know they're doing it. And that research is happening. There's even KYC added now. There was actually a full KYC for even if you're just a milestone reviewer, had a full KYC that I just had to go through to continue. And like I said, literally all I do is, there's a set of milestones. I'm looking at the milestones, looking to make sure that the information is, matches the milestone.
Yeah.
And I'm not the only reviewer. There's always at least two reviewers, in some cases three, where they, and they're all community volunteers who stand up and say, yeah, I can review this kind of material. So that is actually what the current accountability layer in Catalyst is. I don't think it's
Yeah.
perfect, but
And I
it's
think
definitely
and it's probably not perfect. The one thing I would tweak or encourage is if the work is being done to a level today, right? You have projects that are already coming to you saying, "Hey, we want to do this." We need to make sure that gets up front and center and understand A, what projects are being turned away and why, but B, who is doing that. Intersect is doing that work, right? Intersect's doing that review of whatever, and who are the members from what committee, in this case the MCC. But that transparency leads credence to why Intersect is there. Helps bolster the reasoning for that, right? The purpose for Intersect's existence. So I'm a proponent of it so long as those reasons can be validated and that proof exists in terms of that transparency and evidence. So whether it's head count or whatever, but even just being able to log into a Google Docs and say, hey, under the Catalyst section, we had 100 projects and 20 of them were turned away because they have old projects that that haven't been completed yet. Or maybe they do have one that's not been completed, but they provided sufficient reasoning, or hey, we're launching in 3 months, or something like that. Something is helpful. Otherwise, it's a trust me, bro, trust system, right? And
Exactly.
we know when it comes to funds and treasuries, people just cannot handle that. So.
I appreciate that. That's great perspective, man. That's exactly the kind of stuff, that I know we're trying to accomplish. So it's always great to be held to account for those things, because I know this direction that we're trying to be wherever we can. So when you don't see it, we need to know it, make sure that it's more visible.
Yeah. So always happy to keep my foot on the gas on that. I do have an appreciation for the work, regardless of whether we're going to struggle over funds and how much goes where. But I do have an appreciation for it because somebody has to do it, and that's what I try to stress to other people as well. Is like, look, this doesn't just happen, right? How we got to the Constitution just doesn't happen. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of collaboration. It's bringing people together to have an understanding that your interests aren't always represented, and so how do you get your interests out there in the forefront so somebody can represent you or whatnot? It's difficult, and so there needs to be, for lack of it, as corny as it is, an intersect that brings all those things together. So,
yeah.
Mission
It's
is
literally
clear.
the name.
I get it. It's literally in the name. I get it.
So I wanted to reiterate what you just asked Chris about the transparency around project funding. So there's two different, at least within the MCC portion, two different sides of this. So there's parts of the budget where the MCC or whatever mechanism the MCC chooses to use is going to be either accepting projects on these RFPs or not. And then there's the Catalyst side, and that's run and managed by Catalyst using their criteria and their processes. But for either of those, what I'm getting from you there is that you want to be able to see, for any given project, for any given sort of proposal, some explanation of either why that kind of project was, like the criteria basically that project failed such that it didn't receive funding, and then for any project that did receive funding, the criteria that it met such that it did get funding, right? So for any given one, there's a way to understand what happened.
Yes, the biggest thing that you're going to get is it's not enough to have yes or no or pass or what have you. The biggest thing people are going to ask is why, because once they come to an understanding, that's where they're going to be able to move on. Otherwise, what happens is we get stuck in asking these questions, right? Of the projects that are listed, they're the ones that got funded. There's the why not me mentality, right? Or why didn't that get funded? And if you can't answer that, then it's all for naught. You erode. I hate to say erode trust, but that's what happens. And sometimes sometimes people take it in stride, right? You have 10 projects, 7 get funded, 3 did not. You're like, well, better luck next time, right? But it doesn't. People aren't always wired that way. They can't just move on. So they want to know why. Was it not enough funding? Was it a failure at something on a project? Or, are they going to make up their own reasoning, right? Somebody on the MCC does not like this particular company or doesn't get along with somebody, right? And they're always just going to tell them no. Or it's, hey, you know what? We don't need you. This project's going to just go directly or whatever. But what would be nice to know is, hey, let's say a project was known for maybe fraudulent activity or just never delivering, right? It's one of those projects that are continuously sapping ADA from the community and never really delivering. We need to know that as well, right? So having that transparency come from the MCC and being able to tell us the reasoning behind that project just helps us move along, right? Oh, that one looks fishy. We're going to move on. This one always delivers, gets funded every single time. Great. Or this one gets funded but never really provides an ROI if that was a requirement, right? They're just out there. They're putting stuff out there, but it's never really amounting to much. The community should be able to go back and also provide feedback to any of those as well for anything that was denied or some process to provide additional feedback so that they can figure that out. And it's a lot. I understand that adds overhead, right? But if that's what the community wants, that's what you can provide. And if it means, hey, I need another full-time person sitting around to be able to explain this or go through and do these documentations to respond to that, that's fine. But you have to be able to provide that service. Otherwise, all we see is yes or no's. And it's like, well, a guy can spend, a couple hours a month going through a list of spreadsheets and just doing that and moving on with the rest of his life. We need to know where that meat of that work is and that understanding of it. And it's gonna require some overhead. I get it, but it's
does.
needed at the same time.
And I spoke about this earlier on X, Chris, where I was talking about how the rubrics are kind of structured. Now, again, they're not 100% solidified yet. We're still working out the final details, right? But in effect, what you've got is we're judging based on competence, right? Which is, in other words, they have the ability to do the work, right? Competence, capability, that kind of thing. The second one is capacity.
Right.
Do they have enough people? If we say we need 100 heads FTE, then can that company provide 100 heads FTE? Right? It is what it is. It could be 2 heads, just whatever, right? But do they have both the capacity and the capability to deliver? Those two are 75%, or I'm sorry, 70% of the rubric as it stands today. That's 35% each. That's 70% of the rubric is just, do you have the competence, the capability, and the capacity? Then the next 20% is history of delivery. So have they already delivered to Cardano in some way that it's measurable that we can see or not, right? So that's 20% of the score. And then the final 10% of the score is the price, which the price is important, but we don't want to race to the bottom, right? So it was engineered intentionally this way to give incumbents who've done good work the ability to continue, but without keeping out new entrants. So that's what was the balance we tried to strike with the rubric there. So that's the general thing. And I'm working on a slide like right now. Like before I came into this call, I was literally working on a slide because I'm trying to get that to my graphics gurus here so that I can get stuff to put that out, because it's like it's clear that that's not clear enough in the community yet. So we've talked about it since August, since Rare Evo, but it's just not it's not out there well enough. And that's what that's what I'm always doing. I'm like, okay, I'm answering this same question 10 times. Somebody give me a graphic so I can get this thing out there to everybody, because that's what happens. The more I'm answering the same question, the more I'm like, okay, that's one that hasn't been delivered yet. So we'll find a way to deliver it better.
Yeah. That's timely that you mentioned the rubric. So literally about a half hour before this, I don't know if you saw Charles respond to your comment on the rubric, but I guess he had a different understanding of Intersect's role in this, and I will link to this
Yeah,
here.
I have not seen it yet. I've been busy and haven't
And
seen it yet.
so if you see it, it'll be interesting because I think I could go either way on this in terms of where Intersect's role is in 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 the oversight process, and I guess maybe the question came up as to qualification. So I posted that in the chat if anyone wants to follow it, but it is in direct response to that. So it just happened to be timely that you brought that up in terms of understanding that criteria. Um, so I'll give you a minute to read that, but digest that and let me know what your thoughts are. I retweeted it. It's an interesting, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how I feel about it yet because I only just saw it like 10 minutes before hopping
Yeah.
on this call.
No, I'm seeing it now. I hadn't seen it, and that's gets a giant pile of money, gets a unilaterally decided to distribute it, and I really don't feel that's what it is. I will challenge Charles back there because that's not what I'm saying.
Mhm.
When I'm saying that we have a rubric, I'm saying we have a rubric. I'm saying we're giving a process that makes it very fair and obvious who's doing what and and so with elected members and the committees and all these other things, I mean, and that's fine. Charles and I've disagreed before. This won't be the
Yeah,
first time. It's not gonna
absolutely.
be the
Yeah,
last time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, but that, I also see people saying that Intersect's a shit show. Well, I really disagree with that. I don't think that's true either. I think that everybody that's here is trying really hard to
yeah.
put something meaningful and measurable together. So I'm happy to go and have more
Mm.
conversation with Charles on X or otherwise. To preferably otherwise. I prefer not to have these conversations on X, but we
Yeah.
have to, so we're there.
Yeah,
So
and so I just that was I'll I expect that to gain a lot of attraction, and like I said, I saw it, I retweeted it for some visibility because there's some narratives where this is kind of anti what people think Charles wants Intersect to be, and it's like, well, clearly he thinks otherwise. But again, I think back to a challenge that I think Intersect has is on I hate to say controlling the perception, but getting that clear picture of where you're at in the layer between the DReps and the Treasury and what really needs to go through. It's almost like we don't have a clear picture or path to understand. You know, if I'm a project, if I'm an entity, and I want to seek to build something on Cardano, at what point do I leverage Intersect versus going to build my own proposal? And I think not knowing where to go in that fork in the road is kind of challenging, and that's where people kind of drop their own conclusions, right? Or the perception versus of Intersect wants to be over everything, and I firmly believe that's not true at all. I think Intersect has a role in terms of where the cohesiveness needs to exist in the ecosystem versus, like I said, there are other entities out there that have been doing this for a long time or go directly to Catalyst that they can go out there again. And it's kind of funny because I tell people, I was like, look, anyone can put a proposal out there with a certain amount of ADA to do what they need to do, so long obviously as it fits within the net change limit. But like, there's nothing stopping you today. Like, that's the beauty of it, right? However, we have a hard enough time agreeing on anything as it is for the things that even went through Catalyst. So who's that entity that's going to do that work to socialize it, to bring it all together, to gather those opinions and do what the majority of the community feel it's best? Like I said, with the way where we got in the Constitution wasn't an accident, right? It followed through a certain process. Not everybody was happy, but that's how that works. You can't please 100% of the people, 100% of the time. So,
but we sure got to 95%. So
right, yeah, no, more honestly, more than I thought. I expected maybe 70 or 80%.
that's where we were too.
Yeah,
70, maybe 80 at most. We did get 85 on chain as well. So we got to a good consensus. And that's where it's like, I'm seeing this from Charles and I'm like, wow, like I know that we've put out different information than what he just said there. Like
yeah.
we've
Well, and that's
never
right.
said we
And
want to be the
again,
only
Charles
game.
shoots from the hips like half
He
the time.
does.
So
He does. And that's it's okay. I'm gonna
yeah.
shoot back. I'm gonna shoot back and be like,
So just
okay,
just know
we
that's
have
out there. I saw it about 10 minutes before coming in. I'm like, that's an interesting take, but
yeah, it is an
I
interesting
get it
take
at the
because
same
it's
time. But to me, it was weird to see him be, I guess, kind of that misaligned with Intersect. But then at the same time, that tells me, X is kind of a horrible forum to get information out on as well, or to have discourse
It
on.
is.
I hate it with passion, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
So,
We've tried so hard to get people, to use any other
yes,
formats,
yes,
but it's what we have for now.
here.
Yeah, yeah. I saw
I don't know if
Marine's
she's
well, and
got
Eli's
any.
had his hand up for probably
Yeah,
10
Eli.
minutes
Yeah,
now.
for
Well,
sure. I'll shut up. Go ahead.
it's all good. Actually, this is perfect because I had one question coming into this, and it was all about how we were going to get the RFPs through and like what the actual process was going to be. And so we're talking about exactly the right thing. But I think we're also hitting on an important point from what I can see from what I'm seeing from the community is there seems to be a real divergence between the people who think that we should have like an entity that's going to be like processing funds and the people who think that like the DReps should be granularly involved in every single little decision. And I'm not sure how we can square that because honestly, like I think having a DReps involved in all these decisions is just, I mean, unless we decide to like literally fund the DReps for full-time work and a whole bunch
Not
of them,
tenable.
that's just not, it's not going to work that way
Yeah.
unless we do it like through these kinds of processes, right? But then here's my concern, and maybe you can answer something along this. I'm quite familiar with how like public procurements work and how much like work goes into actually doing this fairly and equitably and all that. Like what kind of I guess framework do you have right now that you're thinking of using through Intersect to actually evaluate proposals? Who's doing it? How's that getting reported back to the committees? And then how are we going to keep that from bloating? Like I hate to compare it to actual governments, but I can tell you that from the procurement processes that I've been involved with like governments, these things get out of control fast. So like just curiosity about like, do you guys have a framework in mind about that sort of work yet?
So interestingly enough, it started in 1997. I was the chief technology officer for a firm called SciCommNet. And what we did was software for government procurement. So yeah, I'm intimately familiar with how it bloats, and like that's why it's a little kick in the teeth that I just read that from Charles. I'm like, wow, all this work, all this time, all this, everything that's gone into this process, and that was just a total whiff on what we've tried to accomplish here. Um, yeah, so as you said, a lot of work goes into preparing for these proposals. So it's from all parties involved. That's the other thing. Like so much energy goes through in this process where the RFI portion, where you're putting out information and asking vendors to basically for free give information back to your government body, whatever it is, that says this is roughly how you would do this thing. This is the guardrails you need to stay within. This is how many hours it'll take so that you can create an RFP. Right now, we have an added step here that our budgets have to be created in a decentralized environment. So instead of going right from an RFP to an RFI to an RFP, we've got a step in the middle where we've got to validate that our RFIs are useful to the community. So that's the step we were in now, which is that we're trying to validate the RFIs with the community and say we actually wanted priority is what we really, really wanted to get at here. Like these 20 things are like in TSC, it's like 80 odd items. There's 80 odd items in the TSC. Of those 80 items, what are the most important to get done? And we're learning that. Like Laos is one of the most important one, and there's a few others that fall underneath it that are pretty obviously the highest priority. So then we say, well, okay, we've got this priority list of items. Now, how much funding does the community need to do that? And so we're trying to get at that number, and we've never done it before. So the community really, they're coming in at this cold. Like I can at least know that, we talk to engineers at IO and we talk to engineers at Twig and Well-Typed and all these other companies to kind of give information. So we know that's where there's a certainty that's listed there um, on the spreadsheet as to how certain we are about the quotes. Like we've had enough participation from enough people that we're super confident that that's the amount of people it would take to do the job. So we do have that in a lot of cases, probably, probably in enough cases that it's worthwhile to move forward with the budget. And so all that work's done. But now you have to reach consensus as to whether or not the community is willing to pay for it. And then after you reach consensus, then you do have to track it. And the Constitution says we have to track it, right? The Constitution says there must be an administrator, and the administrator must administer the funds. That's what we're intending to be. It's not we're trying to take a pile of money and do whatever we want with it. It's we're supposed to be your administrator to handle the nitty gritty of the work is done, it's validated by the committee, and then you get paid for it. And that's the process. So yeah, it's
Okay, that all makes sense. Now, like, is there though, like, basically, I guess what I could ask is there like an actual like line item in the budget somewhere that we can find that pays for administrative staff that are going to be looking at each one of these kinds of things, right? And then I guess, like, I think from my perspective, I want to know that so I know which way I'm voting, but also I think from the general perspective, we need to explain to people that this stuff takes work and that there's actually a plan in place for that. Because all I'm hearing right now is just people basically saying, "Oh, well, the DReps can do this," and it's like that's just not realistic, right? To anybody who understands how this works. But yeah,
well, we do have.
It's that one line item that's there's a line item that says 20 million ADA, which is 10 million US dollars, which is Intersect operations. That covers a couple of very important things. First of all, that entire list of staff that we've talked about that would have to do that. They're called operations services, and that would be that's their role. Their Intersect is, gosh, I think Lawrence put it out earlier. I think 40 heads is right.
That sounds correct. I believe that is what I heard earlier was 40 heads.
Okay, so that should be it. So it's 40 heads. And then within that, what that 40 heads does is it is the secretaries for each of the committees. It's each of the staff members that does those operational services roles. And by the way, in a lot of cases, they're doing double duty there. Some of them are both acting as a secretary and acting as an operational services staff member. So they're doing some double duty on some of that stuff right now. But it's 40 heads, and that and then on top of that, I think that was $6-point-something million, $6.8 million roughly for those 40 heads. And then they also had the remainder was all of the infrastructure that goes around it. But then the money that got them to 8.5 million. And then the remainder of that was actually to give a stipend to every committee member so that they could take seriously their role in the committee and be able to do their part of it. So it's about 10 million US dollars. And that's literally what the purpose of Intersect is.
okay, that's fantastic. Thank you.
I swallowed a bug just now.
Oh.
I had a question, but Matthew, I think you were going to say something earlier.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, like on the, like as far as sort of, the phrase like unilateral, insofar as any administrator is involved in the process at all, there's no complete control by the DReps or the administrator, by virtue of the administrator being enshrined in the Constitution and the DReps being the ultimate decision-making function on chain. There's always going to be some continuum, right, between how far the administrator is helping to like put together the budget that gets approved, or say the sub-budget items that get approved, and whether, and then how much it is the DReps that are deciding in a level of granularity on those items. So then I guess like the question just becomes like, exactly where in that continuum do we land? And I think that's partly just what we're working out now. And people sort of there are these like gaps and expectations that open up where people think that this is going to land, in what ways, and miscommunications about exactly how the different elements line up in that continuum. But I think at least like that should be sort of our sort of psychological safety net is there's an administrator, the DReps, the administrator helps the DReps to come to some decision, and the question is exactly where in that continuum do each element of decision land. And so I think sometimes people forget that, and when they do, that's when you kind of get panic or sort of outrage or fear or people's feeling undervalued. And so I think that just helps to have that framework. So I wanted to inject that.
Yeah. So 2 questions now then on when you talk about the administrators and getting a hold of DReps, do you feel like and this is for either of you guys being intimately involved on the Intersect side, is do we feel like there's enough of a head count when it comes to Intersect? I would say no, but I'm thinking in terms of 40 some odd operations people for 800 plus growing DReps, right? 40 operational people for 800 plus DReps plus 20 entities that already do a lot of work with Cardano and the ecosystem today, whether that's Pragma or Project Catalyst or any of the other big major projects out there, Clay Nation, Rare, etc. Is 40 employees enough for 800 plus DReps, 20 plus entities, and the 20, 30, 40, 50 enterprises out there that now want to directly engage in Cardano? And I could just keep adding on to that, but it's a perspective to realize that you don't want to be underwater as well when talking about administrative overhead and the type of demand that we're going to see. Because if the admins are supposed to help the DReps, what admins are also helping those other entities? We have a pretty needy community, but it's there's a lot there to unpack. So
we have a needy community, and there's calls for not funding Intersect at all, right? It has to live on its own. It has to take, make its own money, and then it can do this job. Like that is the way we're being compared as a corporate entity, when in reality we're a public infrastructure.
Yes.
And that's a huge problem. That is a massive gargantuan problem, and it's literally illustrated by the way that conversation is going on X right now. Right, that is exactly what the problem is that it is a complete mislabeling of what Intersect is.
Yeah, and
it's a
and
servant organization, and it needs to have enough people to support it,
yes.
and it doesn't have enough yet.
It does not. I would agree with that. On that note, about being a public infrastructure, one thing that exists in a lot of public infrastructure, at least in the U.S., and I say that specifically because I don't know how it works in all other countries, obviously, but like for my state and local government, every position is public in terms of salaries or additional pay is made and stuff like that, and that's something that should exist as that public entity, that public infrastructure, and I'm sure I'm sure there's no problem of that existing, but let's think back to Intersect that's been around for over a year now. Is that fair to say? Well over a year and a half?
Not well over, but yes,
Okay.
it completed its first fiscal year at the end of December. So it's actually about to produce its books from all of 2024.
Perfect.
On chain. It's about to do that.
Okay.
Every single thing, like who got paid, how much, all that's coming out. It's I think and like I guess CF did 2023's books recently, so they're they're a full year plus behind.
Yeah, I was talking to another friend about
that.
that. Yeah, I was talking to somebody else about that, about the budgets, and I'm like, we can talk about how CF can handle this and IO can handle that, but we have companies that are like literally 2 years behind on publishing what they've done on their books. So Intersecting in a little bit of time. If they beat them by 3 or 4 months by the end of the year, that's better than honestly some corporations that I've seen. So it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the balance to be struck here where, because the other side of it is, how unnerving it is to be an employee of Intersect and people are going to judge me based on the money that my company takes in. No,
I can't imagine. It's got to be. It's got to be rough because and this is what I also try to remind people, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. A race to the bottom, and quality cost work. So, from my experience on the corporate side, I run a team of infrastructure engineers, IT people, and everything like that. And I've had to continuously up my pay to get quality of the work that I was getting. And where I don't care about quality, I go as cheap as I can find. And the difference is what my customer service and what my output is. And if I don't give a darn about my output, then I'll just pay the cheapest thing ever. But if I like really need it to be done and I need the most detail oriented person on it, I know that I have to go more.
Yep.
And so people always will look at a salary and just assume like, oh, you're paying them too much. I'll do it for free, right? And it was like, well, what qualifies you? And what happens if this work is going to end up demanding 60 hours a week instead of 10 hours a week? Are you going to do that?
Yep.
I know you wouldn't do it for free, but people always say they will. That work costs money. That talent costs money. I'm no stranger to that. But I think a lot of people are. They see those salaries or they see the ADA amount and they just freak out and you know.
Well, but what if it's and what if it's not a salary? What if it's, don't forget Intersect is all remote. There's indirect costs for every single position.
Yep.
All right. So you've got indirect costs. So they're gonna be like, they get paid this much money and it's gonna happen. It's going to happen. It's like, no, that one person doesn't get paid that much money. They have to have office and internet and all these other things that take care of it. Or like in our case, there's 10 heads here.
Yeah.
There's 10 heads represented
Well, and
by
people don't
what
take
our
into
firm does.
account all
And
other costs, whether where that person lives, they need health insurance or retirement
absolutely.
funds, and being able to save or whatever. It's a whole thing. I'm fully aware, but
But
yeah, people
but
aren't
now
thinking of
we're
it. Yes.
it's coming out, right? It's going to be public here. And when it happens, some people are going to be really, you know, bombastically angry and say they could do it for less money.
Yeah.
And maybe they can. And
Prove it.
that's totally fine. And by the way, like I've already said, for the stuff that our firm does, it's got to go out for bid. I'm not going to keep doing it if it doesn't go out for bid.
Yeah. No,
I've
that's
already
good.
said it
That's good.
because I
You're
just
forthcoming
can't.
on it, and yeah, absolutely.
I came in when I was needed and took a contract when I was needed to get something done. And I feel like I've delivered good work. That's cool. But I definitely would not continue doing this work if it doesn't go out for bid for other people to get a chance at it. So just my side of things. But yeah, but that's that's where it gets this part of it gets this is the hardest part for me of this is this public, very public pressure because I don't care for it.
I know.
I don't really like the politics side of it. I like the process side of it. I like doing the work and getting the work done and doing the work well. So the public pressure side of it kind of sucks. It's not my favorite.
And the mediums for the most part, the forum not so much, but on X, it's meant to, for lack of a better way, of what drives more discourse, what drives more interaction, and it's drama at the end of the day.
That's right. That's right.
90% of it is bullshit to get to that 10% that actually is meaningful in those conversations. So it's very difficult.
I like having these sessions.
Yes, very much more helpful, which is why as I can, I try to make it to these because I find it just better way to do things.
But yeah, something I wanted to throw out there too was just like a sort of an alternate thing that the MCC has considered at least is using some kind of infrastructure to allow after defining the buckets for the budget and doing RFP to create some kind of way for DReps or just it could be DReps, could be through some other functionality, like maybe Catalyst, for instance, has talked about white labeling their voting stack to let people vote more directly on the RFPs. Now, I'm agnostic basically on that question. It does sound like the introduction of more process that might not improve efficiency. And there's sort of an open question whether, you prefer to, have, say, committee members who have been elected to a position for their expertise on a certain topic to make decisions about what comes into the RFPs, or if you'd prefer to open that to some either all ADA holders or some subset of the community based on some qualification. I don't know what exactly would have to be done there, but there's like a lot of potential options. I think it's just a question of what is realistic, what we actually have the capacity to do in a short amount of time, and yeah, and ultimately what DReps, data holders, SPOs, and the ICC as basically the fundamental governance layer decide is best. But yeah, I mean, our bottleneck is both that decision making on that decision making process on the side of you guys here as DReps, and then on the other side, just what's possible given the sort of social, economic physics, right, that we're dealing with.
Exactly. So a couple things on that. So I'm hearing, DRep tooling, SPOs, CC members having more, well, maybe not CC members, but just the community being more engaged in the RFP process through some method of tooling versus just being presented something that's been decided already by elected committee members, right? The filter, right? Basically at that point.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it. You could do it either way. So I mean, like, right. So
Yep.
if you at the moment, if you have an administrator, so you have to have the administrator. What is the administrator doing exactly? Are they working with DReps in an informal way to work out like what a good set of objectives are for the budget and the numbers that go against those, and then and setting up a process and saying, okay, are you good with this? Do you want to fund this as a process to allocate this money? And then the question can be, all right, and then after that, what is the sort of like granular decision making process for what vendors get the contracts for those things? And that
Okay.
again, like the DReps can decide, do they want to fund a process that has committee members that they've elected to make those decisions? Do they want to fund a process where it then goes back to some subset of the community, like for instance, the people who are motivated enough to participate in catalyst voting, like that kind of dynamic. But the problem in at least in the short term here is that we have, and I mean, Lloyd, you could speak to this much better than I could because I haven't been as involved in the process. We just have a limited amount of capacity, right? So we can't. There's sort of like a lot of ideal sort of in principle potentially solutions that aren't practically possible. And so even though, especially for people who aren't involved, to express commitment to those ideals and say anything less than whatever I've imagined to be the perfect scenario here, is unacceptable. That's all well and good for sort of social positioning, but then it comes down to the question of practical reality and how do we actually get the companies that are working on Cardano public goods funded. So yeah, I don't know all the answers there, but I can see some of the failure modes in the discussion.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of we need to get down to a practical reality, a pragmatic approach to what it is that we're facing across that whole thing. And so, that's difficult because not everybody looks at it from a pragmatic type of view in terms of how do we get from A to B. And some want to do it with as little middlemen as possible. They want to remove that administrative layer. But then that also requires that we have a certain level of DReps with a certain level of commitment that's willing to go through that rigorous process of all those RFPs and everything like that. It makes it work. And I know that there's not going to be that many DReps out there probably that are willing to go that far. They don't want to turn it into a full-time job. On the flip side of that, I can see where the tooling is still going to be. I would like to see personally tooling that just helps us better understand the process of how things flowed through Intersect on the administrative layer. It's that visibility to me that really, really counts, but also having that ability to where if we see something questionable, as I alluded to earlier, having that reasoning and that understanding why decisions were made, that DReps can interject or call for, let's say, conference to have a discussion over something that they want to go a different direction. And so that's all something has to exist in process. And so maybe something that helps with that is the terms escaping me right now, but doing a tabletop, if you will, of an exercise of going through what that process would look like for each committee, right?
Mhm.
Hey, here's a session. We're going to do an hour of an RFP that came in, and what this looks like in that time frame, right? Let's say you expect to turn around every RFP like once a week. I don't know what the actual number is. It's arbitrary. But in
That's
that
probably
week
about
period,
right too.
probably about right. Okay, I figured it can't be too crazy, right? Because there's so many things that we're expecting to have to get through. So if it's any more than a week, I'd be surprised. But we'll say a week, and of that week, of receiving the RFP, who goes through, looks at it, and approves it? At what period in that week is it provided to DReps ahead of time before a decision is finalized? But hey, look, we're looking at denying or approving this RFP. Here's the reason why. Here's the full documentation on it. The DReps have time to respond if they need to, or not, or that decision's been made and we can provide our feedback as to why maybe the Intersect committee needs to maybe pivot or backtrack a little bit and go another direction based off that feedback. But I do think the bulk of it should still live within Intersect and the administrative layer personally. And I'll have to talk to, see if I can get some feedback from those who've delegated to me to see if they feel likewise. Obviously, I want to do what's in their interest as well. But from a pragmatic point of view, I don't see there's a whole lot of different ways to go about that's realistic and moving things forward. My biggest thing is we have to move forward. Um, Personally, like it's got to move. We can't just stop. The rest of the ecosystems out there, the other builders, they're not going to stop, and they don't have the 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 politics and the bureaucracy, the red tape being introduced here. And the red tape only exists in our minds. We got to look at the process in terms of how do we best leverage it. If there's improvements that can be made, we should do that. But we shouldn't treat it as like it's a hurdle to get over. It's not, in my opinion. We just need to flesh some things out.
Right. Well, and Chris, I really appreciate where you're coming from on that. And like I said, if the more you can, if you engage in the process and you see something that needs more clarity, I'm all ears because that's
Mhm.
exactly what we're trying to do is flesh that out right now, and get that over the top. Because yeah, you're right. We have to continue. We are beholden to the ADA holders, and we're in our own governance now, whereas literally everyone that's our competition has some form or another of complete centralized control.
Yeah.
Vitalik is a benevolent dictator, is what it is. You know, we've got completely centralized chains masking as being decentralized, but are entirely centralized. So we've got those are the competitors. Those are the people we work against. So we have to get this real process really right, and we have
Mm-hmm.
to get through it. And again, if our dear leaders on X making comments like that, that's going to make it harder, not easier. So I got to
Yeah.
talk to him. I got to say what was that all about?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask him, like,
Yeah.
what is it that makes you think this is unilateral with all the work that's been done here? So, you're right, Chris. We got to figure out what in the process is tying people up, what in the process is making them feel that they don't have the voice that they need. And once we get past that, we are unstoppable because we're real. We're actually real and legitimate. So you take that, you know, real decentralized chain and be able to actually actively and quickly make decisions. That's going to be amazing.
Should ask him to make a video and try to juxtapose the different kind of like ideas that he has in his head. How's this going to work? Because I don't get it, right? Like, I mean, unless you're really thinking that like the part that I'm really concerned with is that we end up in a situation where we cheap out. We decide not to pay for the administrative cost that it's going to pay to do this properly. We say, well, DReps can handle it, and then we don't pay the DReps adequately either. Then you end up with an incentive model that the only DReps that are left standing are the ones that have outside reasons for doing what they're doing.
Right.
And then what? Right? And then you wind up with a not so good system to fund anything really. That is just going to be done by private interests. So I don't know. I think it's concerning, but I think Charles should understand that. So
The guy can be frustrating. you know,
Well, maybe he can whiteboard something.
well, and so it's, the frustration comes from, you're championing Intersect and how we got through the Constitution, and people have a similar type of challenge in terms of how we got there, and we're going through a similar type of motion when it comes to the budget, and so you know, I don't want to say tone deaf, maybe disconnected, because let's face it, Charles is connected to so many different things going on within the ecosystem right now, both within and outside of Cardano. He tries to build those connections, and everything else he's got going on his personal side of the business is whatever. So he's going to look at something, right? And he takes a small snippet from Jane, quoted by Lloyd, and then comes back and has a different understanding of maybe what exactly is going on, and he doesn't have the full context, I think, of the conversation. And so it, unfortunately, because it's Charles, it's also it's damaging to some respects of the whole process and misunderstanding. So I look at it in terms of awareness, and it's interesting because I did not expect to see that response myself. So, and Lloyd will respond to Charles when he has ample time and to look at it. And Lloyd, count to 10, take deep breaths. I'm sure Lloyd handles pressure with amazing grace. I will say that, because he's one of the few that his face is over and more than most out here in front of everybody during this budget process. And for me, I will provide feedback that's a little bit frustrating. I don't see, for the people that are in charge, a lot of the process, and maybe I'm just missing it somewhere. Again, I can only be in so many places. I only have so much time. But here I sit, and we have several different budgets out there. And, the two people maybe as close to the process as it is right now are here. But, I mean, there's 40 people and part of Intersect, and there's one or two on this call. And so if you want something that speaks volumes, it's that. In organizations that I work with, when you have something of this magnitude, of this level, everyone steps up to the plate. And now we can say that they're all busy and they're updating stuff, but I can tell you that I'm not seeing things change that fast from my purview, just to be pessimistic for a moment, that suggests that they're working as hard as maybe they allude that they are. And that's just me throwing some stuff out there. And so I have absolute confidence that someone is doing some work, but what helps a lot more is just seeing more. The faces help. Lloyd, you're out here constantly. I see you in the spaces. I see you everywhere. But why is it you, right? You can't possibly be. Well, I mean, Lloyd, freaking a lot. But for growth in marketing, for open source, for civics, for technical, for product. If I'm looking at this, where are the people that are speaking directly to that? Where are those committee members?
Yeah, well, obviously not here in this meeting.
But you are, right, Matt? So from an MCC perspective, you're here.
Well, I can say as well, I don't want to take I think part of our difficulty is the number of different outlets. So this is something that I haven't figured out. It's like a problem that's challenging me. We had this with the hard forks too, actually, that there are so many different outlets and channels and areas of interest that are being managed, that it's hard to create a signal where people know that when they go there, they're going to be getting a lot of value for their time. And because of that, then people don't want to invest in any of the channels. And so but the difficulty obviously is that it's hard because we have so many different things that are pulling us to have multiple outlets for information. Just the number of different things being managed, like a hard fork and the Constitution and the budget, they're all related in significant ways, right? But I mean, that just gives you three things that in their own right are really hard to understand. And then you have people in multiple time zones, and you have different kinds of people with different interests, like SPOs, DReps, developers. And so I think, this doesn't my explaining the problem doesn't excuse the problem.
No, not at all. But, not at all. I want to hear. I want to hear your frustrations on the front.
I think I think that's a part of what makes it so difficult. And when you enter any given one of those channels, it feels kind of thin. And I think it's partly just the medium, like the number of different outlets. Now, that said, I also want to just say, like, my being here is in part like happenstance. So like the sort of the path, the history of me getting to this meeting is the chair of the MCC, asked MCC members if we could sign up to be at one of these budget meetings to answer questions about the MCC budget. And so, I signed up for this meeting. I think there were 3 that were there, and there's going to be more as well, I think, too. But if I just had to say, like, I mean, Katerina, Sirik, and Yuda, I can't remember Yuda's actual name, but you know Yuda.
Yep.
Right? They've been much more involved, and there's been several significant updates to the MCC budget over the last couple of weeks as they've been working really hard on it. So just you get the kind of impression maybe that I'm more involved here than other MCC members. And in fact, on the MCC budget, I don't spend that much. I spend hardly any time on it.
And I know Yuda spends a ton of time on it. The MCC one specifically, I do see a ton happening there, and that, at least from the purview of like X and on the forum posts and stuff like that. So I do see that, just at a broad scale, but absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the problem too is, I mean, this is something that Lloyd just mentioned, is committee members, as far as I'm aware, no committee member is paid. Right. And so they all have, other things that they're that are earning them their money, and so you get some committee members who are very, very involved, who are doing a ton of work, and some committee members who attend proceedings and like vote on some of the decisions. Right. It's and so it's we're in this sort of intermediary period, and the difficult thing is like getting the budget resolved. I think will resolve a lot of those issues and like help fix a lot of the incentives that make
amazingly
things difficult,
right. Yeah.
But in the meantime, the fact that we don't have it also seems to people like a reason why we shouldn't have it. And so it's like, we're in this tough stage. But I just say, like, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it to try to fix those incentives, and it seems like our best option. So
it is, and we're going to work to fix it. We're going to keep pushing forward to try to come to these to whatever level of consensus we can to get these budgets over the line. I do have to be conscious of time, guys, that we are over by about 6 minutes. So like, it's a fascinating conversation. I'm enjoying it, and I'm actually getting a lot out of it as far as, seeing things that we can do to improve from a perception perspective, from a, just being more visible with what our teams are doing, and try to get more of that information as publicly as we can. And I appreciate all of you guys. Like, it's funny, what I tend to end these on is that your attention is your most precious resource. Like, and we are spreading our attention all really thin, trying to keep all this going. So like, that is what's going on here. Our attention's our most precious resource. We've got to protect it, cultivate it. We've got to do the things we need to use it in the most effective ways we can. And I feel like we really made some of that headway tonight. So thank you all for participating today.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
thanks, guys. See you around.